The grand hall of the St. Cecilia Academy was quiet, a heavy, expensive kind of quiet. The air smelled of polished wood, old books, and a faint hint of nervous sweat. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, lighting up the dust motes dancing above rows of velvet seats. Every seat was filled with the best students from the music school, their backs straight, their faces serious. They were all waiting for one man at the front. On the wide, empty stage sat a single magnificent grand piano. It was a beast of gleaming black lacquer, looking both beautiful and a little bit frightening. This was where their hero, and sometimes their nightmare, would sit. Maestro Victor Volkov. Volkov was a legend. His name wasn't just said. It was spoken with a kind of respectful fear. His recordings were studied like holy texts. His concerts were always sold out. He was known for fingers that could move with impossible speed and power, but also for a temper that could freeze a room. He didn't just want you to play the notes. He demanded you become the music. And today, a few brave, or perhaps very nervous, students would play for him in this masterclass. Among the sea of carefully combed hair and crisp shirts, in the very last row, sat a boy. He was small for 12, and he seemed to be trying to make himself even smaller. His sweater was a soft, faded blue, a little too big at the wrists. His name was Leo, and he was not a student. He was the quiet shadow of the place. His mother was one of the academy's janitors. In the evenings, after the last practice room had fallen silent and the professors had gone home, she would do her work, and Leo would often be with her. While she cleaned blackboards and emptied bins, he would sit in the corners of practice rooms, listening to the ghosts of the day's music still hanging in the air. He knew every hallway, every storeroom, and the sound of a mop bucket rolling on marble was more familiar to him than the sound of applause. He had slipped into the master class because his mother was cleaning the offices upstairs. The door to the grand hall had been propped open, and the silence had pulled him in. He found the empty seat in the last row and had been sitting there, perfectly still, for an hour. On stage, a girl with red ribbons in her hair was finishing a difficult piece by chopping. Her fingers flew across the keys, and the music was technically perfect, like a brilliant, cold diamond. The final chord rang out, and she placed her hands in her lap, breathing heavily. The audience of students clapped politely. Then, Maestro Volkov stood up. He was a tall man with sharp eyes and silver hair. He didn't walk to the piano. He seemed to command the space around it simply by existing. The applause died instantly. "Well," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried to the back row without needing to be loud. "That was very clean." The girl's hopeful smile wavered. "You have practiced the notes." "Yes," Volkov continued, pacing slowly. "You have conquered the fingering. You have memorized every marking on the page. But tell me, where was the storm? Where was the heartbreak? Where was the story?" He stopped and looked not at the girl, but at the whole audience. "You play like you are afraid of the piano, like it might bite you. Music is not a museum piece to be kept behind glass. It must live and breathe and weep." He sighed, a sound of deep frustration. He had heard 3 students play so far, each one flawless, each one to his ears empty. He was growing tired. He wanted to be shocked, to be moved. He wanted a raw, untamed spirit, not another perfectly trained robot. "Technique can be taught to anyone with discipline," he said, waving a hand. "But this?" He placed a fist over his heart. "This feeling? This cannot be taught. It is either there, or it is not. It is a gift given to very few." His gaze swept over the young, eager faces in the first rows. They were all the same, products of the same system, playing the same safe way. His eyes moved further back, past the serious students, past the slightly less serious ones. They landed, almost by accident, on the very last row. There, he saw a pair of eyes that were different. They weren't eager. They weren't nervous about being judged. They were just watching, absorbing. They belonged to a small boy in a worn sweater who seemed utterly disconnected from the tense, competitive energy of the room. The boy looked like he didn't belong here at all. He looked like he had wandered in from the street. A strange, impulsive idea, born of irritation and a twisted sense of theater, popped into Volkov's head. It would be a lesson, a dramatic way to make his point about true, natural genius being a myth you had to work for. He pointed a long finger directly at the back row. "You," Volkov said, his voice cutting through the silence. All heads, like puppets on a single string, swiveled to look. The boy in the back, the quiet one. Leo felt his heart stop. 100 eyes were suddenly on him. He froze, his body turning to stone. "Yes, you?" Volkov said, a slight, not unkind smile playing on his lips. It was the smile of a magician about to perform a trick. "Come down here." A nervous giggle rippled through the audience. They all knew who Volkov was. They didn't know this boy. He wasn't in their classes. He wasn't one of them. This had to be part of the maestro's lesson, a joke to make a point. "Come, come," Volkov said, his voice now booming and theatrical. He gestured to the vast, empty stage and the giant piano. "Don't be shy. Perhaps we have been looking for inspiration in the wrong places. Perhaps it hides in the corners. Come show us. Show us how it should be done." The words were an invitation, but everyone heard what they really were. A challenge, a setup. He was asking the impossible from someone who clearly couldn't deliver. It was a cruel way to prove that genius wasn't something you just found in a back row. It was built with years of brutal practice. Leo's face went pale. He wanted to sink into the floor. He looked to the door, but it seemed a million miles away. A kind-looking older student sitting next to him leaned over and whispered, "It's okay. Just go down. He won't bite." The student gave him a gentle nudge. That nudge broke the spell. Slowly, as if walking through deep water, Leo stood up. The sound of his shuffling feet in the silent hall was terribly loud. He walked to the end of the row, his eyes fixed on the floor, and began the long walk down the center aisle. The silence was so complete, he could hear the rustle of his own sweater. He felt the stairs like physical touches. He climbed the 3 steps to the stage. The lights were hot and bright, blinding him. The grand piano looked like a sleeping monster. He stood beside it, looking tiny and lost. Volkov looked down at him, his dramatic smile still in place. "And what is your name, young man?" Leo's mouth was dry. He tried to speak, but only a soft, breathy sound came out. He swallowed and managed to whisper, "Leo." "Leo," Volkov repeated for the audience to hear. "And what will you play for us today, Leo?" Leo just stared at the piano keys. They were a landscape of black and white, familiar and terrifying. He had touched pianos before, in empty rooms when his mother wasn't looking. But never like this. Never with him watching. "Cat got your tongue?" Volkov said, and another light laugh came from the students. He gestured grandly to the piano bench. "Sit, play something, anything. Let us hear the natural feeling." Leo slowly sat on the very edge of the bench. He didn't adjust it. He just sat, looking small and helpless before the majestic instrument. He lifted his hands. They were small, with clean but short nails. They hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. The audience held its breath. They expected a clumsy children's song, maybe a wrong note followed by a burst of tears. They expected a humiliating punchline to the maestro's joke. They were ready to feel a little bit sorry for him, and then to learn the lesson Volkov was teaching, that music was hard, serious work. Leo closed his eyes for a second. The hall, the lights, the staring people, it all faded away. In his mind, he wasn't on a stage. He was in a small, dim storage room. He was sitting on an upturned bucket. The air smelled of dust and floor wax. And from an old, crackly record player, a powerful, stormy, beautiful piece of music was pouring out. It was a sound that had filled his head for 2 years, a secret friend he carried with him everywhere. He opened his eyes. His hands stopped trembling, and he began to play. The first notes were soft, tentative, a simple, searching melody in the lower part of the piano. A few students in the front row exchanged glances. This was what they expected. Something basic. A little sad, maybe, but childlike. The maestro's point was being made for him. But then, something shifted. The boy's hands, which had seemed so small and unsure, settled. His back, which had been hunched, straightened just a little. The simple melody wasn't an end. It was a question. And the answer came a moment later, as his right hand rose and fell, dropping a cascade of higher notes that sparkled like cold rain against a window pane. A frown touched the maestro's brow. This wasn't a nursery rhyme. The chords were too complex, the structure too deliberate. He knew this piece. Of course, he knew it. Everyone in the hall who studied seriously knew it. It was the opening of Victor Volkov's own Capriccio in G minor, a piece he had written 20 years ago, a piece famous for its technical difficulty and its emotional fury. It was his signature, a warhorse for advanced pianists, and this boy, this child in a faded sweater, was playing it, not just playing the notes. He was telling it. The Capriccio was a storm of emotions. It began with loneliness, a wandering spirit. Then it built into anger, frustration, crashing chords that were supposed to sound like fists against a wall. The technical passages were dizzying, a whirlwind of notes meant to show off a pianist's control and power. Leo played it all. But it was different. The anger wasn't hot and explosive. In his small hands, it became a deep, cold sorrow. The crashing chords were less like punches and more like heavy doors slamming shut, one after another, echoes of loss. When he reached the whirlwind parts, his fingers moved with a fluid, natural grace. They didn't look like they were fighting the piano. They looked like they were moving with it, like water finding its path down a rocky stream. He missed a note here and there, a slight fumble, but it didn't matter, because the feeling was so overpoweringly true. The hall had been still before. Now it was like a tomb. No one coughed. No one shuffled. They were all caught, frozen in the sound. Their mouths were slightly open. The girl with the red ribbons had tears welling in her eyes, though she didn't know why. Victor Volkov felt the world drop out from under him. The smug, theatrical feeling was gone, vaporized. His heart was pounding in a strange, thick rhythm. He was hearing his own music, but it was like hearing it for the first time. He had always played the Capriccio with a kind of fierce pride, a showing off of his strength. This boy played it with the heartbreak that had inspired it, a heartbreak Volkov had buried under technique and fame long ago. He watched Leo's face. The boy wasn't looking at his hands. He wasn't looking at anything in the room. His eyes were half closed, focused on some distant, inner landscape. He wasn't performing. He was remembering. He was reliving. The piece marched towards its famous, difficult finale, a series of roaring octaves and wild arpeggios that raced up and down the keyboard, meant to sound like a final, defiant cry against the storm. Every pianist sweated over this part. It was pure athleticism. Leo took a breath, so soft it was almost a sigh. And then he began the finale. But he didn't play it with roaring power. He played it with a desperate, soaring longing. The octaves weren't hammers. They were waves rising and falling. The arpeggios weren't a show of speed. They were a release, like a bird finally finding an open sky. He made it sound less like a battle and more like a farewell. When the final, deep chord resonated through the hall, Leo simply took his hands away and placed them in his lap. The last sound hung in the air, vibrating in the wood of the floor, in the bodies of the listeners, before it slowly faded into absolute silence. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, a single person in the third row began to clap. It was one slow, heavy clap. Then the person next to them joined. And then, like a dam breaking, the entire hall erupted. It wasn't the polite applause from before. This was a thunderstorm of noise. Students were on their feet, whistling, shouting, their faces alive with shock and wonder. They had come to see a master tear apart technical performances, and they had witnessed a miracle instead. But Leo didn't hear the applause. The moment the music ended, the spell was broken. The bright lights, the deafening noise, the 100 staring faces, it all crashed into him like a physical force. His breath hitched. The world, which had been so small and focused, suddenly became huge and terrifyingly loud. He slid off the piano bench. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He looked like a startled animal. His eyes, wide and scared, scanned the roaring crowd. The towering figure of the maestro, who was staring at him as if he were a ghost. Panic took over. He turned and half ran, half stumbled towards the side of the stage. He found the steps and hurried down them, his head low. He pushed through the first few people standing at the edge of the aisle, who tried to pat his shoulder or say something to him. He didn't stop. He just kept moving, a small blue figure weaving through the standing, applauding crowd, heading for the dark safety of the back doors. Viktor Volkov watched him go. The applause washed over him, but he felt numb inside. The joke had been on him. The lesson had been for him. This quiet boy hadn't just played the notes. He had unearthed the soul of the music, the soul Volkov himself had forgotten he'd put there. A deep, hot shame washed over him, followed by a tidal wave of something else. A desperate, burning curiosity. Who was this boy? Where did he come from? How was this possible? He held up a hand. The applause slowly died down, turning into a buzzing whisper. All eyes were on the maestro, waiting for his profound comment, his analysis of this breathtaking event. Volkov's voice, when it came, was quiet. It had lost all its boom and drama. It just sounded tired and old and deeply shaken. "The masterclass," he said, "is concluded." He didn't explain. He didn't dismiss them. He simply turned and walked off the stage, not towards the green room where the head of the academy was waiting for him, but towards the aisle, following the path the boy had taken. He left a hall full of confused, buzzing students behind him, their world tipped upside down. The great Viktor Volkov was chasing after a ghost, and he needed to find him before he disappeared for good. The grand hall was chaos. 100 conversations buzzed like a beehive that had been kicked. Students clustered in groups, their eyes wide, replaying what they had just seen. The air was thick with words like impossible and genius, and who was that? But Viktor Volkov moved through it all like a ship cutting through fog. He didn't see the students trying to catch his eye. He barely heard their questions. His own heart was a loud drum in his ears, pounding out a single command: find him. He pushed through the heavy doors at the back of the hall and entered the cooler, quieter marble hallway of the academy's main building. It was empty. The boy Leo was gone. Volkov stood for a moment, feeling a strange panic. The child had vanished as suddenly as he had appeared. Then, from a corridor to the left, he heard a familiar rhythmic sound. Asterisk squeak. Thump. Squeak. Thump. Asterisk, it was the sound of a janitor's cart with a wobbly wheel. It was a sound of the real world, the working world of the academy that happened behind the scenes of concerts and master classes. Volkov followed the sound. The hallway was lined with practice rooms, their doors shut. The sound led him to an open doorway marked custodial. Inside was a small, cluttered room, smelling of soap and old wood. There was a desk piled with papers, shelves of cleaning supplies, and in the corner, sitting on a low stool by an old, scratchy record player, was the boy. He was just sitting, perfectly still, staring at the warm carpet. His mother, a woman with kind, tired eyes and hair tied back in a simple bun, was kneeling in front of him, holding both of his hands. She was whispering to him, her voice soft and steady. A mop and bucket sat nearby, forgotten. The woman looked up as Volkov's shadow filled the doorway. Her eyes widened in recognition, then flickered with something else, not fear, but a fierce, protective wariness. She stood up slowly, putting herself subtly between Volkov and her son. "Maestro," she said, her voice quiet but firm. There was no excitement in it, no honor at being addressed by the great man. There was only a mother's caution. Volkov realized he didn't know what to say. All his grand speeches, his sharp criticisms, his eloquent praise, they all dried up in his throat. He looked past the woman at the boy. Leo hadn't moved. He seemed to be somewhere far away. That was my capriccio, Volkov finally managed, the words sounding stupid to his own ears. The woman, Alana, nodded slowly. "He likes that one," she said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Likes it?" Volkov's voice rose slightly. "He played it. He played it from memory. How? Who is his teacher?" Elena looked down at her son, then back at Volkov. Her shoulders slumped a little, the defensiveness softening into a deep, familiar weariness. "He has no teacher, Maestro. He has never had a lesson." The words hung in the small, soap-smelling room. They were impossible. They defied every rule of music, of talent, of how the world worked. That cannot be. Volkov stated flatly. "It is," Elena said. She gestured to the old record player. "His teacher is that. And the quiet," she explained, her words simple and heavy with a lifetime of carrying this secret. She had been a piano student herself, long ago, right here at St. Cecilia. Life had other plans. She'd had Leo, and the dreams of the stage were swapped for the steady work of keeping the academy clean. It was a good job. It let her be near the music she loved, in her own way. When Leo was small, as she worked the evening shift, she would bring him. She couldn't afford a babysitter. While she cleaned the practice rooms and hallways, Leo would sit with her. She played records sometimes to fill the empty silence of the big building at night. Old recordings of the great pianists. She noticed Leo would become very still when the music played. He wouldn't fidget or play with toys. He would just listen. When he was about 6, they were in an empty practice room. She was cleaning the window, and an old recording of a Beethoven sonata was on. She turned around and saw Leo's small fingers moving on the closed fallboard of the piano, tracing the invisible keys in perfect rhythm with the music. "He doesn't talk much," Elena said, choosing her words carefully. "The world is very loud and confusing for him. But sounds make sense. They have patterns. He remembers them. All of them." Volkov listened, his mind reeling. He looked at the record player. A stack of old, dusty vinyl records sat beside it. On top was his own recording of the Capriccio, the sleeve faded and worn at the edges. "He heard it once?" Volkov asked, pointing at the record. 2 years ago," Helena nodded. "I played it. He was sitting right there, on that stool. He listened the whole way through, and then he went to bed. He never asked for it again. I thought he'd forgotten. Forgotten? Volkov almost laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. He just played it back note for note. Not note for note, Elena corrected softly. He played it the way he felt it. That statement hit Volkov harder than any technical critique he had ever given. He played it the way he felt it. This boy had taken the raw material of Volkov's music, absorbed it into his very being, and given it back. Transformed by his own silent heart. Just then, another man hurried into the doorway. It was the head of the academy, Dr. Finch. He was a man who usually looked calm and in control. Now his glasses were slightly crooked, and his face was flushed with excitement and alarm. "Victor, there you are. The entire school is talking. What on earth just happened? Who is this young prodigy?" He peered into the room, seeing Elena and Leo. "Ah, Elena, is this your boy?" Dr. Finch knew Elena. He was a kind man who always said good evening to the cleaning staff. But he was looking at Leo, now not as a janitor's son, but as a potential asset, a mysterious discovery. Volkov held up a hand, cutting off the stream of questions. He was still staring at Leo. The boy had finally looked up. His eyes met Volkov's. They weren't the eyes of a prodigy, or a genius, or a ticket to fame. They were just the clear, calm eyes of a child who lived in a world of sound. "How?" Volkov asked again, but this time his question was quieter, directed at the universe, not at Elena. Dr. Finch, the scientist in him taking over, stepped forward. "It's a phenomenon. Perfect pitch, of course, but more. A form of profound auditory memory. An echoic memory so precise it's like a recording. He doesn't just remember the melody. He remembers the timbre of the piano on that old record, the space between the notes, the breath of the pianist." He looked at Leo with fascinated wonder. "It's extremely rare. His brain is a unique library." The word library struck Volkov. This wasn't about creating music. It was about accessing it. The boy wasn't composing. He was retrieving. He was a living archive of every beautiful sound he had ever heard in these hallways. Leo finally spoke. His voice was a whisper, a little rusty from disuse. He wasn't looking at the important men in the doorway. He was looking at his mother. "The storm is quieter inside," he said. Elena smiled, a sad, beautiful smile, and squeezed his hand. She understood. Volkov did not understand the words, but he felt their meaning in his bones. The storm of the capriccio, the anger, the fight in Leo's hands, had become an internal weather, a private sadness. He looked from the brilliant, baffled Dr. Finch to the strong, weary mother, to the small, mysterious boy. The joke in the masterclass had unraveled everything. He had come to teach, and instead, he had been shown a door to a world he never knew existed. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled and excited him, that he had to see what was on the other side. The search for the boy was over. Now, a completely different kind of search was beginning. The days after the masterclass were strange and buzzing at St. Cecilia Academy. The story of the janitor's son who stunned Maestro Volkov spread like a rumor through the old building. Students whispered in the hallways. Teachers debated over coffee. The polished, predictable world of the academy had been cracked open by something it couldn't explain. For Victor Volkov, the world had narrowed to a single, quiet mission. The shock had worn off, leaving behind a deep, stubborn need. He couldn't just walk away. The sound of his own music, played back to him with such raw feeling, haunted him. He saw the boy's calm, distant eyes. He heard the mother's simple, protective words. He found Dr. Finch in his book-lined office. "I want to work with him," Volkov said, without any greeting. Dr. Finch took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Victor, be reasonable. The boy is different. He isn't a student. He has no formal training. His mother is very protective. I don't want to train him like a student, Volkov said, his voice intense. I don't want to put him in a suit and make him play scales. I want to open the door. I want to see what else is in that library of his. He used Dr. Finch's own word. You said it yourself. He is a unique phenomenon. Should we not try to understand it? Dr. Finch was torn. He saw a scientific opportunity, a musical miracle. But he also saw a vulnerable child and a worried mother. His mother will never agree to a spectacle. She fears for him. No spectacle, Volkov promised, and for the first time in a long time, he meant it. This wasn't about showing off a discovery. This was personal. Just him and me and the piano. In private. You can be there. She can be there. No one else. It took 3 visits to the small, tidy apartment Elena and Leo shared, a short walk from the academy. The first time, Elena barely let him pass the door. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. He is not a toy, she said, her voice firm. He is not a circus act for you to show your friends. Volkov, who was used to being welcomed with open arms, stood on the worn welcome mat and nodded. I know, he said, and the honesty in his own voice surprised him. What he did? It was not a trick. It was a gift. I just want to listen. The second time, he brought no grand promises. He brought a simple book of colorful paintings, sunsets, forests, stormy seas. He gave it to Leo, who took it silently and began to slowly turn the pages. Music is like colors, Volkov said, not to the boy directly, but to the room. Some sounds are blue and quiet. Some are red and hot. Leo looked up from a painting of a dark blue ocean and met Volkov's eyes for a second. On the third visit, Elena sighed a deep, tired sigh. She looked at her son, who was sitting at their small, out-of-tune upright piano, his fingers resting softly on the keys, making no sound. She saw the peace on his face when music was near. One session, she said, with me there, and if he is unhappy, it ends. For good. So they began. Not in a grand teaching studio, but in a small, sunlit practice room at the academy, early in the morning before any students arrived. The only sounds were the hum of the building and the soft patter of rain against the window. Volkov had planned nothing. He just sat on a chair by the wall. Elena sat next to him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Leo stood by the beautiful grand piano, looking at it like it was a familiar animal. Play anything, Volkov said gently. Not my music. Anything you remember. Leo sat. He thought for a long time. Then he began to play. It was a simple folk tune, something Elena used to hum while she worked. But then it melted into the sound of rain from a movie soundtrack he must have heard. Then a few bars of a pop song that had been playing from a student's open window. Then the complex, joyful opening of a Mozart sonata before drifting back into the folk tune. It was a stream of consciousness made of sound. He wasn't playing pieces. He was wandering through the landscape of his memory. Volkov understood Dr. Finch's library now. It was true. The boy didn't just memorize songs. He absorbed the sonic world around him. He was a collector of feelings translated into noise. The challenge wasn't getting him to play. The challenge was communication. Leo spoke rarely and never about music in the usual way. He didn't know terms like crescendo or staccato. Traditional teaching was useless. So Volkov invented a new language. He used the book of paintings. He pointed to a bright yellow sun. Can you make the music sound like that? Leo would play a high, sparkling, warm melody. Volkov pointed to a deep, dark purple forest. Leo's music became lower, mysterious, with clusters of notes like hidden creatures. He used objects. He dropped a pencil on the wooden floor. "Tap, make that sound sad," he said. Leo would find a single ringing note on the piano and hold it, letting it fade slowly, a sound of pure loneliness. Slowly, a fragile trust was built. Volkov stopped being the fearsome maestro. He became a curious guide. He learned that Leo's world was made of textures and colors of sound. The rumble of the laundry machine in their apartment building was a deep, gray chord. The whistle of the kettle was a bright, urgent signal. Elena watched, her tight worry slowly softening. She saw her son not being pushed, but being seen. She saw Volkov, this proud, famous man, sitting on the floor with Leo, tapping out rhythms with 2 pencils, a look of pure fascination on his face. But the outside world was still there. The buzz at the academy didn't die down. It grew. Students would press their ears to the door of the practice room, trying to hear the secret lessons. A local newspaper reporter got wind of the story and called Dr. Finch, the janitor's prodigy. They wanted to call it Dr. Finch felt the pressure. One afternoon, he came to the practice room. He looked at Volkov, who was showing Leo how a melody could climb like a staircase. "Victor," he said quietly, "the board is asking questions. Donors are curious. They want to see him. A small performance, just for a few important people." Elena immediately stood up. "No," she said, her voice flat and final. "Absolutely not." Volkov looked from her furious, protective face to Leo, who had gone very still at the word performance, his hands freezing above the keys. He saw the boy's shoulders tense. The peaceful, colorful world they had been building in this room was being threatened by the noisy world outside. "He's right, Elena," Volkov said, surprising everyone, including himself. He wasn't siding with Dr. Finch. He was being practical. "The whispers will not stop. They will grow. A private showing on our terms, with just a handful of people in this room. It might satisfy their curiosity. It might protect him more in the long run. If we say no to everything, the demand will become a monster." He looked at Leo. "We would not make you play my music or anything hard. We could play a conversation. You and me. I could ask you a question with my piano, and you could answer with yours." Leo looked at his mother. He looked at the piano. The storm inside him was quiet, but he understood the danger of the storm outside. After a very long silence, he gave a single, tiny nod. It wasn't excitement. It was an agreement, a fragile truce with the world that wanted a piece of him. Elena saw the nod. She closed her eyes, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. She knew he was doing it for her, to make the pressure go away. She felt a surge of love so strong it hurt. She also felt a cold trickle of fear. The door of their private world was being opened, just a crack. She could only pray they would be strong enough to close it again when they needed to. The day of the small recital arrived. The chosen practice room felt different. It was too clean, too quiet. Chairs had been brought in 20 of them, arranged in neat rows. It was supposed to feel casual, but it felt like a courtroom. By late afternoon, the room was full. Not with students, but with important faces. Members of the Academy's board, a few major donors, a respected critic, and Dr. Finch, who flitted around like a nervous bird. The air hummed with low, expectant conversation. They were here to witness the mystery, to see if the rumor was true. In a small side room, Leo stood very still as his mother fixed his collar. He was wearing new clothes, a simple shirt and trousers that felt stiff and strange against his skin. His face was pale. Victor Volkov knelt in front of him. "Remember," he said, his voice calm and low, "this is not a test. It is just a conversation. Like we do, I will speak first. You listen. Then you answer. No one else matters. Just the sound. Leo's eyes were wide, fixed on a crack in the wall behind Volkov. He gave a tiny, shaky nod. Elena hugged him tightly. You can stop any time, she whispered into his hair. You just walk to me. That is all. They entered the main room. A polite, curious applause greeted them. It felt like a wave of heat. Leo flinched. He kept his eyes on the floor, a familiar path to the two pianos that had been placed side by side on the small stage area. He sat at one. Volkov sat at the other. The audience fell silent, leaning forward. Volkov began. He didn't play a famous piece. He played a question. It was a series of low, thoughtful notes, like someone walking alone in a heavy coat, wondering. The melody rose, searching for light, then fell back, unsure. It was simple, open-ended. He finished and let his hands rest in his lap. He looked at Leo. All eyes turned to the boy. Leo's hands hovered. The room was so silent they could hear the rain starting outside. He could feel the weight of the stairs. He saw the faces, the eager eyes, the notepads ready. The safe, colorful world of sound in his head began to crumble under the pressure of all this watching. His breath hitched. His fingers, which usually knew the way, felt like someone else's. He touched a key. A single clear note rang out. Then nothing. He tried a chord, but it was clumsy, wrong. A faint, worried murmur went through the audience. He tried again, a fragment of something, but it broke apart. His shoulders hunched. He looked small and trapped under the bright lights. He wasn't playing music. He was drowning in silence. He looked across at Volkov, his eyes full of a silent panic. Then he looked past him, to the side of the room where his mother stood. Without a sound, he slid off the bench. He walked, head down, through the confused silence, past the rows of chairs, and straight into his mother's waiting arms. He buried his face in her shoulder. The audience was stunned. The critic cleared his throat. A board member shifted uncomfortably. The prodigy had broken. The miracle was a myth. The whispers began, sharp and disappointed. Viktor Volkov stood up. He did not look at the audience. He watched the mother and son for a long moment. He saw the way Elena held him, a fortress against the world. He saw the boy shaking. And in that moment, every selfish thought, the desire to show off his discovery, to take credit for this genius evaporated. He turned to the audience. His face was serious, calm. You have just seen, he said, his voice filling the room without needing to be loud. Exactly what I hoped you would see. The whispering stopped. They all looked at him, confused. You came for a show, Volkov continued. You came to see a machine that plays back music. A trick. A thing to be amazed by. He walked slowly to the front of the pianos. That boy is not a machine. What he has is not a trick. It is a rare and fragile way of being. It is a heart that listens so deeply it becomes an echo. He gestured to the empty piano bench. He did not fail today. He taught us. He reminded us that real music is not for performance. It is not for your approval, or your notes, or your donations. His voice grew stronger, edged with a passion they usually only heard in his playing. It is a private language. For some, it is the only language. And we do not get to demand that it be spoken on our command. He looked at Dr. Finch, who was staring at the floor. He looked at the board members. You want to put him on a stage? To be your found talent? You will kill the very thing you admire. You will turn that echo into a noise, and then into silence. He took a deep breath. So here is what will happen. I am establishing a fund here at St. Cecilia. It will not be in my name. It will be called the Listening Fund. It will be for students who do not fit your perfect molds. For those who hear music in the rain, or in the rumble of a train, or in the silence between heartbeats. For those who need to learn in color or in feeling, not just in notes on a page. He finally looked back at Leo and Elena, and its first purpose will be to ensure that this young man has access to any room in this academy, any piano, any time of day or night, for as long as he wishes to speak his language in peace, with no expectation, no audience, ever. The room was utterly still. The critic had put down his pen. The disappointed looks had changed to something else, thoughtfulness, a hint of shame. Volkov walked over to where Elena and Leo stood. He crouched down so he was level with the boy, who was still hiding his face. "Leo," he said softly, "that was the most important performance of my life. Thank you." Leo slowly turned his head. His eyes were red, but the panic was gone. He looked at Volkov, then at the pianos. "The conversation," Leo whispered, his voice so faint only the three of them could hear. "We didn't finish." Volkov smiled, a real warm smile that few had ever seen. "We have a lifetime to finish it, and we will do it in our own time." Weeks later, the buzz had finally faded. The story of the failed recital was, in its own way, more powerful than the story of the masterclass. It made people think. In a soundproof practice room, late in the evening, a single lamp cast a warm pool of light over a piano. Leo sat there. His stiff new clothes were gone, replaced by his soft, faded blue sweater. His mother sat in an old armchair in the corner, mending a shirt. Viktor Volkov sat on the floor nearby, leaning against the wall, his eyes closed. Leo was playing. It was not one piece, but many. A thread of a lullaby, woven into the sound of wind from a winter's walk, brushed against the memory of a joyful trumpet line from an old jazz record. It was a tapestry of his life in sound. He played without fear, without pressure. He played for the two people who listened not as an audience, but as companions on the journey. This was not a concert hall. There was no applause waiting. But in that quiet room, filled with the unpolished, beautiful noise of a heart, speaking its only fluent language, something far more valuable than fame was found. It was a home for music, and it was enough.